Our next presenter is from New York. Frank Biocca is the Newhouse Endowed Chair Professor of Communication with appointments in Computer Science and Information Studies at Syracuse. So he is an endowed chair. He's also a professor of interaction science at Sungkyunkwan University in Korea. And he directs the Media Interface and Network Design Labs. It's an international, multi-university human-computer interaction and communication lab. And he's interested in how mind and media can be coupled to extend human cognition and enhance human performance. His current projects include research on mobile, collaborative, augmented reality systems, the design of telecommunication interactive environments, and research on psychology of presence in virtual and game environments. So we've planned to invite Frank back in 2010, but we couldn't work it out. So we're happy to have you here, Frank, from Syracuse University. Good morning and welcome.
Well, thank you for the introduction. I think when we originally chatted, I was going to be out there live, and I would have the opportunity of a night on the town and a good steak, and so I'll have to pass on that. It'll have to be virtual for today. And so I'm glad to be able to drop in via this mobile technologies, and it makes us a little more collaborative across space. And as I think was mentioned, we're part of the Mind Lab, and the Mind Lab is a set of labs that is interested primarily in human-computer interaction and how these technologies can augment our cognition. And some of the things we're talking about are out of a project called the Mobile Infospaces Project, which is funded by the National Science Foundation, which looks at new ways to interact with mobile information while being completely movable and through augmented reality display. So you have information basically arrayed around your body as you move around in space as part of the goal. Well, let's take a look a little bit about before we move on to augmented reality, to put the context is that we're really thinking about here how to maximize our use of mobile information. And our current technology, of course, is the mobile phone itself, which has a number of limitations. So one of the limitations you probably have seen is, of course, is the limitations in the sensory display. The display is very small. There's a little amount of information available on that to transmit information. The phone may have limited contextual awareness, like older media may be limitations in terms of understanding your position in space, your current set of tasks, and people around you and objects around you, though that is changing. And there are limited I/O devices attached to it, so we're still using the keyboard from the 1890s, and of course some version of the mouse which comes out of the 1960s. So the interface, as it's now moving from a phone to a mobile wearable computer, is to some degree overwhelmed by the amount of information diversity, continuity, and the need for interaction. But there are a number of advantages, right? That you have continuous access and connectivity while you're moving through the space, easy to initiate, you can use anywhere as a network delivery. It's a wearable computer, so it is the first truly wearable and personal computer and attached to your moving body. So it's a potential platform then for a true mobile environment. And it's inherently social as well, with a tremendous capacity for social interaction. So fundamentally then, the phone is really embedded in the world. It's inherently, in potential, a mixed reality medium. Now, what do I mean by mixed reality? But here, in terms of mixed reality, is this continuum that increasingly you see in the environments we interact with between the real environment, which just has sensory information from the natural world that we've all known, to the virtual reality environment you would have in games where the information is purely virtual. And between that is this continuum of different forms of interaction where the virtual and the real are intermixed and coupled to some degree. So augmented reality is the one that comes closest to the physical environment and basically superimposes 2D information or 3D information on the real world for you to interact with. And that's the one I want to focus in on a little now. So is mobile augmented reality, to get a sense for that technology, because it's really a cluster of technologies. So you have fundamentally a wearable computing platform, and we'll assume that to be the phone for now, the smartphone enabled and capable. And it may have a variety of sensors on it. Sensors that keep track of your location in space, which the current phones do have in terms of GPS locations. But increasingly the need for keeping track of location of the body, where your hands are in space, and increasingly where your head is in space, if we're going to use augmented reality. And maybe access to your viewpoint, what you're looking at and what you're hearing might be shared on the network. And there may be other sensors, including in relationship to the other talk, there is sometimes physiological sensors to be aware of your emotional and mental states. And on the display side is, I think, where a lot of our focus tends to be on things like the head-mounted display. So it tends to be, not always in augmented reality, but a display that is worn close to the eyes so that it can display information. There may be spatial audio, and then haptics, sometimes some sort of feedback to the hand and the other haptic systems. So if we look at displays, then how do we potentially send this information out to individuals? And here, there's the three forms of these displays that are currently out there competing for the future, if you'd like. One is an optical see-through display, so it's like you're looking through a set of windows or glasses, and some information, some of the light from the real world is being passed through and then mixed with a display that has some of the virtual information. A video see-through display where you see the world through a set of cameras, one or two cameras, and then an image is composited with the virtual information, and then you see the merging of the physical world and the virtual world in this purely composite environment. And a more unusual display, a projective display, which actually projects light into the world and reflects back a merger of those two bits of information, the virtual and the physical environment, requires a special kind of display. So currently, then, the movement is in the area of recent head-mounted displays, primarily to increase the bandwidth of virtual environments and augmented reality environments. This is an example of some of the recent, more immersive displays that are out there from our colleagues just down the street at the OTA Lab. And this is a set of displays shown at MIT and elsewhere that are part of a potential number of startups as well. But here's the closer to the future vision. Our goal is to actually have something that is very light and transparent and superimpose information on the eyes and is completely immersing the eyes into a mixture of virtual and real information. One ideal form factor for one vision of how that display might look is a contact retinal display, for which some prototypes exist. Although there are issues about how the eye can focus on that near plane and the distant plane at the same time. But it's another way of superimposing information on the world. So the goal then is to, if you look at the information that we're trying to send through these displays in your mobile system, you can think about there's three kinds of information that potentially would be in there. One is uncoupled information. It doesn't care about space per se. It's just general information that's not linked to an object or a person or a thing. But then there's maybe loose location coupling. It's broadly aware of your information location, like GPS, and provides you a little bit of the context of the world you're in. And you have that currently in your phone and some of the applications. But what's desirable is a more tighter spatial coupling where the virtual objects and the physical objects are fused more tightly, and there's more direct virtual information. And that requires some evolution in technology. So in that case, then we're looking at that kind of information. We want information that potentially is both spatial and contextual to support a user while they're moving in the environment. It might be information about locations like maps, labels, information about the past of the environment if it's an historic site. There's information about objects, things like plans and diagrams and the internal structure of an object. Information about people, name, history, and social links that may be attached to that person that immediately come up when you're interacting with that person. Or information about actions, things that tell you what the next step of your plan is in a set of action, or maybe histories of actions. All of those are beginning to appear in the phone, but the phone is not currently well suited to engage in that kind of overlay on all these areas, location, objects, people, and actions in real time. So the current mobile phones, when they have augmented reality applications, tend to be rather loosely coupled information. So broad information about your location, but you can see that the range of view is quite limited, and there may be all kinds of information left and right, which you would have to continually move your phone around to potentially look at all that information, and it may not be in your hand, you may not be walking down the street with it in front of you, and also too, it may not be able to alert you of information because it's sitting in your pocket. So it has limited usage. So the Google Glasses, which have been getting a lot of publicity of late, is part of this desire to migrate out into that environment so that there's a continuous queuing of visual information to a mobile user. And so if you look at the Google family of products, they have a lot of spatial products involving Google Maps and all kinds of labeling and images of buildings around the world, and then all kinds of information about possible actions, advertising, or what have you. But the current phone is sitting in your pocket most of the time. But here you can see in this display a migration to not a terribly immersive display, but one that might be the first adoption with a camera and a display that is not continuously in front of the eye, but you can look at when you need, and potentially a more immersive display that can handle the interplay between the outdoor lighting and the indoor light that you might need for a more immersive interaction experience. So it's part of that general migration. And what you're seeing, I think, in some of this is a movement towards a tighter coupling and integration, which is already apparent in the phone, between the virtual world and the physical world. So you can imagine that the 3D world of the physical environment and the 3D world of the virtual environment and the physical environment are being fused so that you can see labels attached to objects, labels attached to people. Where you are, information is provided within your context, and it requires a device to potentially support that. So what kind would be examples of that integration between those two components that are already in the family of augmented reality systems? One, of course, is navigation support, which keeps track of locations in space and information that's related to your navigation. You see the most advanced system here in emergency services, where there'll be spatial data about the interior of buildings and what might be inside of buildings and navigation on the outside. You see those primarily in some of the military systems and now diffusing into the commercial systems. And you can see early versions of commercial systems with some labeling of the environments around you on your phone or on a heads-up display. Also, too, a bunch of applications that deal with revealing the internal structure of things. So here'd be an example where, instead of a doctor looking at the 3D information about the body, its internal bones and structure, it's superimposed and fused with the real body so that the doctor can interact with the patient and see the individual interact with the patient while seeing the internal structure of the anatomy for a better capacity for a diagnosis. And you see some work in that specific area. And that's another form of augmented reality, but more the interior space. And also, too, procedural support, where the augmented reality provides you steps. Do step one. Okay, now that you've done step one, do step two, where objects are sort of put together in a way that they're guided by the computer. And if you've never had to assemble anything like an IKEA piece of furniture, and you're looking at a manual and trying to assemble the parts, you know the difficulty. And actually in our lab, we've shown that we can increase the efficiency of people on any one of these kinds of tasks by at least 40 to 50% by using augmented reality information instead of traditional or other kinds of computer displays. And then also too, we also have information associated with people. Their names, their histories, their roles, and what have you. The camera is capable of identifying the face already. And so that information then can be brought to your awareness while you're interacting, but then it requires a display to be interposed between you and the person so that information can be accessed while interacting with that person and while engaging in recognition. So all kinds of information of a social nature, both for information and play, can be attached here. Actual marker, face recognition, and maybe some coding of behaviors and psychophysiological responses. Another area that's a potentially growth area, which you see already in the gaming area, is pervasive gaming, where the game is now leaves the computer screen and goes out into the world. Where the phone and the interface is a way to potentially interact with objects and experiences that are partially in the world and partially in the virtual world and fused in a game that's now leaving the home and outside of the environment. There's a potential lot of opportunities there. Now there are challenges for augmented reality technology to move into that area. And the challenges are primarily, there's some in the display domain, which are particularly significant, which is, one is the development of a form factor, developing a very light but immersive set of glasses. And so the Google Glass is an example of a very light display, but it's not yet immersive. So it only covers a very small amount of the visual field and only when you look into it. One of the challenges, of course, of having a mobile display is the sunlight. The sun is very bright, so the luminosity of the outside daylight must be compensated for a very bright display so the two images can be fused and the virtual environment can be as bright and dominant as the real world, and that's a challenge. In some displays, when you focus in on the near world, the little window right close to your eyes, you change the focal view of your eyes, and therefore you're no longer seeing the outside world because you're looking in the near visual field. And then, of course, a nice see-through display that's very similar to the glasses that I'm wearing that covers most of my visual field. And there are flexible, transparent displays by Samsung. Actually, the university I work with for in Korea is actually the oldest university in 1398, but also owned by Samsung University. So if you make a lot of money, you can always buy your alma mater. And also, too, acceptance and tolerance. And so you want to wear, can you wear this all the time? And so some of the very good virtual reality displays are very hard to wear for long periods of time. And so one of the goals is to have a system that is potentially wearable for at least several hours at a time. The other challenge is in the area of tracking. If we're going to tightly couple the virtual and the physical world, then we need to know very carefully where you are in space, where you're looking, but also where objects are in space. And so you see now forms of hybrid tracking, and they're working in all the major labs and companies on hybrid tracking. It's partially geospatial, partially gyroscopic information, and then maybe feature-based extraction from cameras and other sensors that try to build a model of the world around you so that the virtual environment can be tightly coupled so that the labels on the world don't swim around as you move around and you move your head, which is a real challenge at the moment. But that is one of the most important technologies in this area. So what's the goal then for this medium? It's primarily to have natural interaction, to be able to move information and displays from the current system up into the sensory channel. So right now, you're wearing a head-mounted, a earbud, which now brings the speaker close to your ear, and of course the phone system now brings that sensor close to your mouth. So these are being attached to the body. With the set of glasses, now the display is leaving the screen of your mobile phone and moving close to the eyes, where actually the display ultimately belongs by one argument. And it frees the body and hands for action in the environment. You can't hold your iPad, for example, up to the environment with dual cameras to get the virtual environment because you couldn't remain in that position for any length of time. But if it sits on your head, it's a pair of glasses, you could potentially do that. And also, too, to make action more intelligent so that virtual environment can be superimposed on the world and support your action in the world, warn you about events, warn you and tell you about opportunities. And finally, I think the augmented reality techniques may be the means then for adding and overcoming some of the limitations on your phone with its many icons and applications which are now overwhelming the capacity of the phone, so that information bandwidth to rapidly, potentially provide information in this evolving mobile media that's very rapidly evolving at this point and needs some medium change to increase the amount of bandwidth that can be sent through these mobile media. And I'll stop right there. Thank you.
Since you're going to, we're going to just let you leave after this. I'd just like to ask you about distraction. Looking at the Google Glasses video, the issue that comes up is distraction. We already have problems with distraction. Do you think that augmented reality is going to help us with distraction? Because it's like a heads-up display. You're not looking down at your dashboard. You're actually looking at the real world. So what are your thoughts about distraction?
And actually, we've done some studies on that. And actually, there's some, in terms of the displays on the Google display, in terms of the prototype, the promotion part, actually they put information in some of the wrong parts of the visual field. And so you do not want information actually present in the lower part of the visual field because that's actually where a lot of hand action and mobile action is engaged. And so alerts and warnings are actually potentially displayed up here. There's actually very little, there's a different system actually allocated to this upper part of the visual field, and that's a little less distracting than putting it right in the focal plane. So really, I think one of the ways to minimize distraction actually is to not put it into the action space, which is down here in the visual field and in the focal plane, but in the upper parts of the environment. And so one of the dangers, of course, is that you have triggers, alerts, when your attention must be moved to another location. And so that requires some context awareness. So for example, you wouldn't want information displaying about some opportunity down the street when you're engaged in a movement on your car. And so that can be partially handled by where the information is displayed and whether it interferes with either focal vision or the action plane. And from what, at least in our own areas, we've looked at, it's primarily in this upper part of the visual field that seems to have less of those distractions. But it is one of the dangers, and if you look at in the Google prototype displays, whoever's putting those together doesn't seem to be aware of potentially that danger.
Great. Okay, well, thanks, Frankie. So thank you, Frank, for joining us today. And it would be great to have you here in person. Maybe in 2014, you can come and join us in person. So thank you so much for joining us today.
All right, thank you for the invitation. Enjoyed dropping in.
Okay, thanks.
All right.